She walked toward him like the room had no right to breathe. Every eye followed her, the way her hips moved, the way her chin stayed lifted, the way she wore danger like perfume. Kwon Tae-yang sat at the head of the VIP section like a god who had grown bored of worship, and he didn't look up when she came. He looked up when she touched his jaw. When her lips found his. When 30 seconds rearranged the entire architecture of his existence. And when she pulled back and his body did something it had never done in 15 years of war, it betrayed him completely. Welcome to Stories Behind the Billions, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. It started with a bet. Faith had not planned to be at Noir, Seoul's most exclusive underground club, the kind of place that didn't exist on any map and didn't appear in any search engine. She had come because her best friend Mina had begged, pouted, and eventually guilt-tripped her with 3 years of favors. Faith was a visiting architectural consultant from Lagos, 4 weeks into a Seoul contract, and the only dangerous thing she had planned for the evening was a second glass of wine and an early bedtime. But Mina had other plans. "That's Kwon Tae-yang," Mina whispered, her voice dropping to something almost reverent. She tilted her champagne glass toward the far end of the room, the elevated VIP section roped off by 2 men who looked like they had been carved from concrete. Head of the Kwon syndicate. Richest, most feared man in South Korea. Possibly in Asia. Nobody touches him. Nobody speaks to him unless he speaks first. He has never, not once, been seen to lose his composure. Faith looked. Kwon Tae-yang sat alone at a long black table, a glass of something dark in his left hand, his right arm resting along the back of the empty seat beside him like he owned not just the chair but the air around it. He wore a white button-down shirt, collar open, no tie. His jaw was clean. His eyes were scanning the room with the quiet efficiency of a man cataloging exits, threats, and irrelevances, and most things in this room, it appeared, were irrelevances. He was, without question, the most striking man Faith had ever seen. She looked away before he could catch her. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. Mina's smile curved the way smiles did right before they caused problems. "Because Jeon just bet me 50,000 won that you wouldn't dare walk over there and kiss him." Faith blinked. "Absolutely not." "Faith. Mina. That man looks like he dissolves people. That's what makes it exciting." Faith drank her wine. She was not going to do it. She was a professional. She had a presentation on Monday. She was a grown woman with a mortgage and a skincare routine and entirely too much sense for this. 18 minutes later, she was walking across the room. She told herself it was the wine. It was the music, low, dark, throbbing through the floor. It was the fact that Mina had added the words "unless you're scared," and something in Faith's chest had simply refused to accept that framing. She had spent 31 years being afraid of the wrong things. She was not going to let a man in a white shirt be one of them. The 2 concrete men stepped forward as she approached the rope. She didn't stop walking. Something about the certainty in her stride made them hesitate, just long enough. She ducked under the rope and crossed the last few meters before either of them recovered. Kwon Tae-yang looked up. His eyes were dark, not unkind, but bottomless, the kind of eyes that had seen everything and filed it away. They swept over her once, and whatever calculation happened behind them, it happened fast. Faith stopped in front of him. Her heart was a riot. Her face was perfectly still. She reached out and touched his jaw, just her fingertips, tilting his face a fraction toward her, and she kissed him. Not frantic. Not performative. Slow, and certain, and devastating. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. When she pulled back, his glass was still in his hand. His face had not moved. But the evidence beneath the table, where the white fabric of his shirt lay across his lap, told an entirely different story. His body had made a declaration without his permission, and the whole room saw it. The room had gone silent. Not the polite silence of people minding their business. The collapsed, airless silence of people who had just witnessed something they would never speak of again out of pure self-preservation. Kwon Tae-yang's body had betrayed him. In front of everyone. Faith's eyes dropped once. Came back up. And for one suspended, electric moment, she and the most feared man in Seoul stared at each other. Then she turned and walked back across the room. She didn't run. She didn't look back. She kept her pace even and had chin up until she reached the street, and then she pressed her hand flat against her sternum because her heart was doing something completely irrational and she needed it to stop. "Well," Mina said softly, her eyes very wide. "That happened." Faith stared at the window. Her lips still felt warm. Back inside Noir, Kwon Tae-yang had not moved. His lieutenants, 3 of them, seated further down the table, were studying the ceiling, the floor, the abstract art on the wall, anything that was not their boss. The music continued. The club continued. Only the air in the VIP section remained frozen. Tae-yang set his glass down very slowly. He pressed 2 fingers to his lips. Then he said, quietly, to the man on his left, "Find out who she is. If you are still watching, please like, share, and subscribe right. This is you telling the algorithm to push this video so more people can get to see it." By morning, he knew everything. Faith Kwon 31. Nigerian. Lead architectural consultant for the Hansung Tower project on the east side of the city. Staying at the Lotte Hotel on the 14th floor. No criminal record. No known associations with any rival family. No agenda, no handler, no patron pulling her strings. Just a woman who had walked across a room and rearranged something inside him that had never moved before. Tae-yang stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse and read her file a second time. Then a third. His second-in-command, Park Sung, stood behind him at a respectful distance, reading the silence the way only men who had survived a decade in Tae-yang's service could read it, carefully, and without comment. "She has no connection to the Yoon faction?" Tae-yang asked. "None." "The Baek family?" "No, sir. She's clean. Completely." Tae-yang was quiet for a long moment. Outside, Seoul shimmered under early morning cloud. He had not slept. Not because of fear, he hadn't felt fear in so long he had nearly forgotten its texture. But because every time he closed his eyes, he felt the ghost of her fingertips on his jaw, and his body responded with the same catastrophic loss of discipline it had displayed in front of 30 witnesses, and he found that profoundly unacceptable. "Send flowers to her hotel," he said. Sung blinked. "Sir." "White orchids. No card." There was a pause. In 15 years, Tae-yang had never sent flowers to anyone. "Yes, sir," Sung said. Faith found the orchids outside her hotel room door at 7 in the morning and stood in the hallway in her pajamas staring at them for a long time. There was no card. The arrangement was obscene in its elegance, 30 stems at minimum, the kind of white that made everything around it look gray. She brought them inside. She set them on the table. She stared at them while she made coffee. Then she Googled Kwon Tae-yang. The search results were thin in the way that powerful men's results always were, controlled, curated, the shape of a person rather than the substance. There were a few business articles. A photo from a charity gala 3 years ago, him in a dark suit next to a senator's wife, his expression the same controlled blankness she had seen last night. A Forbes mention. And then, if you scrolled far enough into the murkier corners of the internet, the rumors. The Kwon syndicate. Weapons. Influence. A body count that nobody could prove and everybody believed. Faith closed her laptop. She had a presentation on Monday. She had a mortgage. She had a skincare routine. She looked at the orchids. "Stop it," she told herself firmly, and went to shower. "Hold on besties, what are you waiting for? Why haven't you subscribed? Please like, share, and subscribe right now." She saw him again 3 days later, and she was furious about it. She had gone to a business lunch at Yoonsik, one of Seoul's finest restaurants, with her project team and the Hansung Tower client. She was mid-sentence about load-bearing structural considerations when she looked up and saw Kwon Tae-yang seated across the restaurant at a private table, looking directly at her. He was with 2 men she didn't recognize. He was not looking at them. He was looking at her with the same quiet, total focus he had turned on the room at Noir, except now that focus had a single point, and that point was her face. Faith looked back at her presentation notes. Her hands were not steady. After the lunch, she was waiting for the elevator when she heard his voice behind her. "Faith Ose." She turned slowly, because she refused to spin. He was closer than she expected. He was even more overwhelming in daylight, taller, the white shirt replaced by a charcoal jacket that sat perfectly across his shoulders, the kind of man who made rooms feel smaller simply by occupying them. "You know my name," she said. "I know several things about you." His voice was low. Not threatening, but not warm either. Precise, the way a scalpel was precise. "You're on the Hansung project. You're from Lagos. You've been in Seoul for 4 weeks and you have not taken a single day off. Are you following me? I had you investigated." The elevator arrived. Faith stepped inside and turned to face him. He stepped in after her, unhurried, like this was simply the natural continuation of a conversation they had already been having. "That's unsettling," she said. "Most people find me unsettling." He pressed the button for the lobby. "You kissed me." It was a dare. Something moved in his expression, so brief she almost missed it. Almost. And if it hadn't been a dare. The elevator doors closed. Silence swelled between them, warm and charged and deeply inconvenient. "Goodbye, Mr. Kwon," Faith said, when the lobby arrived. She walked out. She didn't look back. She kept her pace even and had chin up until she reached the street, and then she pressed her hand flat against her sternum because her heart was doing something completely irrational and she needed it to stop. The following week was a war of small gestures. A car appeared outside her office building every evening at 6, sleek, black, anonymous. She never got in. A reservation materialized at a restaurant she had mentioned to her colleague in passing, a table for one, paid in advance, under her name. She went, because the food was extraordinary and she refused to let pride cost her a meal. A message arrived on her work phone, no number, just a Seoul address and the words, "The view is better from there." She did not go to the address. She went to the address. It was a rooftop on the east side of the city, private, unlocked as though someone had arranged it, and from it, she could see the entire Hansung Tower site laid out below her like a blueprint come to life. The skyline beyond it was extraordinary. She stood there for 40 minutes in the cold with her hands in her pockets and her heart doing that irrational thing again, and she hated every second of it, and she didn't leave. She found out later that Kwon Tae-yang owned the building. He came to the rooftop on a Tuesday evening. Faith was already there, she had started going regularly, she wasn't examining that too closely, and she heard his footsteps behind her and didn't turn around. He stood beside her. Looked at the skyline. Said nothing. They stood like that for a long time. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. A pause. "I don't know," he said. And the honesty of it, simple, unguarded, from a man who she suspected was never either of those things, landed in her chest like a stone breaking a surface. She looked at him. He was looking at the city, the line of his jaw clean against the dark sky, and there was something in his expression that didn't fit the man from the internet articles, something quieter, almost young. "The orchids were too much," she said. "I wasn't sure of the appropriate quantity. 30 stems is not appropriate. I'll remember that." A pause. "For next time." She shook her head. But she didn't walk away. By the end of the second week, they had a routine neither of them acknowledged as a routine. Tuesday evenings on the rooftop. Occasionally a message, his were always brief, declarative. "There is a gallery opening Thursday, it might interest you." A book delivered to her hotel with no card, the kind of obscure architectural theory text she had been trying to find for 6 months. Tae-yang was learning her. Quietly, systematically, the way he learned everything, through observation, through the gaps in what she said versus what she meant. He learned that she laughed loudest when she was nervous. That she ordered food in threes when she was stressed. That she touched the back of her neck when she was trying not to show she was moved by something. He learned that she was lonely in Seoul in the particular way that strong people were lonely, not helplessly, but quietly, like a room that hadn't been opened in a while. He didn't know what to do with that. He only knew that whatever it was that had happened in his body the night she kissed him had not resolved itself. It had deepened. Settled into something more complex and harder to dismiss than a single moment of physical betrayal. He had tried, methodically, to classify it. He had failed. He had stopped trying to classify it and simply started showing up. The danger arrived on a Friday. Faith didn't know about the Yoon faction's interest in her until Sung appeared at her office building at noon, jaw tight, and told her she needed to come with him. "I beg your pardon," she said. "Mr. Kwon's orders. There has been a development." "I don't take orders from Mr. Kwon." "With respect, Ms. Osei, you do, as of this morning." He held out his phone. On the screen was a photograph taken that morning, Faith leaving her hotel, unaware, and a message sent from a Yoon-affiliated number to one of Tae-yang's informants, "Acquire the woman." Leverage. Faith stared at the photograph for a long time. "Acquire," she repeated. "Yes." She picked up her bag. "Fine," she said. "Lead the way." Tae-yang's primary residence was a compound on the north edge of the city, understated from the outside, vast and meticulously designed within. He met her in the main room, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and she noticed instantly that he was furious. Not loudly. He was never loud. But his jaw was set in a way she hadn't seen before and his eyes had gone very dark and still. "Who are the Yoon faction?" she asked. "My rivals." He paused. They identified an opportunity. "Me. You." He looked at her directly. "I am responsible for this. My attention toward you was not discreet. I put you in danger. The acknowledgement, delivered without deflection, surprised her. She had expected the powerful man's instinct: minimize, redirect, control. What happens now? She said. You stay here until this is resolved. She opened her mouth. Or, he said, very calmly, I can arrange alternative secure accommodation. But you will have protection either way. I will not negotiate on this. She looked at him. He looked back. His hands were clasped in front of him and very still, but she had learned by now to read the stillness. It was the thing he did when the alternative was betraying too much. How long? She said. A few days. A week at most. She sat down on his sofa. Pulled out her laptop. I have a presentation on Monday. Something in his expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, toward relief. I'll have your materials sent over. The days inside his compound rewrote something between them. There was no performance possible in proximity. Tae-yang, stripped of the architecture of public menace, the VIP sections, the bodyguards, the curated distance, was someone she hadn't expected. He cooked, early in the morning, moving through the kitchen with the quiet efficiency he brought to everything. He read, thick texts, history mostly, a handful of architectural theory she noticed with a private smile. He slept very little. He checked his phone constantly, but when he put it down, he was completely present in a way that very few people were. He asked her questions. Not the social performance kind, real questions, the kind that required actual answers. About Lagos. About what had made her want to build things. About what she was afraid of. That last one came on the third evening, sitting on the floor of his library with their backs against the shelves, a silence between them that had become, without either of them announcing it, comfortable. What I'm afraid of, she repeated. You don't have to answer. She was quiet for a moment. I'm afraid of becoming someone who plays it safe for so long that they stop being brave enough for the things that actually matter. He looked at her with that particular stillness. What are you afraid of? She asked. A long pause. Losing something I don't know how to protect. The words sat between them with a weight that pressed against her ribs. She didn't look away. Neither did he. The crisis came on the fifth night. Sung burst into the library at 11 with the news. 2 Yoon men had been spotted on the compound perimeter. The house went into lockdown in under 3 minutes, a choreography so swift and practiced it told its own story about how often this life required it. Tae-yang pulled Faith by the hand to the interior safe room, a reinforced space off the main hall, and installed her there with 2 guards and his own jacket draped around her shoulders because the room was cold, and then he turned to leave. Tae-yang. She grabbed his wrist. He stopped. She had never used his given name before. Neither of them acknowledged it. She was looking up at him with an expression she hadn't let herself wear in front of him before, unguarded, scared, real. Come back, she said. He looked at her hand on his wrist. He looked at her face. His free hand came up and, very gently, held the side of her face. 1 second, 2, the way you held something you were terrified of damaging. I will, he said. And then he left. It took 40 minutes. She counted every one of them. When the door opened again and Tae-yang walked in, jacket gone, a bruise forming along his cheekbone, wholly intact, the sound Faith made was not dignified. She crossed the room and before either of them had made a decision about it, she had her arms around him and her face pressed against his chest, and he had gone completely still for 1 second before both his arms came around her, tight and certain, like she was the conclusion to an argument his body had been making for weeks. They stood like that for a long time. The guards found something very interesting to study on the opposite wall. Later, in the living room, she cleaned the cut along his cheek with hands that were almost steady, and he sat on the low table in front of the sofa and let her, watching her face while she worked. The compound was quiet now. The threat neutralized. You're going to have to stop putting yourself in rooms where people hit you, she said. That's an occupational challenge. Retire. From what? All of it. She pressed a clean cloth to his cheek. He didn't flinch. Whatever all of it is. And do what? She met his eyes. He was very close. The distance between them was something she had stopped being able to measure in a way that made sense. I don't know, she said quietly. Something that doesn't make women who barely know you terrified for 40 minutes. He reached up and covered the hand she still held against his face. You were terrified? Don't make it into a thing. Faith. She looked at him. He was looking at her with his whole face open in a way she had never seen on him. No calculation, no management, just something raw and entirely undefended. I have never, he said carefully, In my life, had someone tell me to come back. The words broke something open in her chest. She didn't move. He didn't move. The room held its breath around them. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to stop him, and when he was close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, she closed the distance herself. The kiss was nothing like the one in the club. That one had been a dare. This one was a reckoning. The story will leave the rest of that night here, where it belongs, between them, private, earned, and completely theirs. She was gone when he woke up. Not disappeared, her things were still in the guest room. But she was not in the compound, and the guard reported she had left at 5 in the morning in a car she had called herself, and Tae-yang stood in the doorway of the empty room for a long moment before he understood what had happened. She had run. Not from him. From the morning after version of herself, the one that would have to look at him in daylight and reckon with what she had let herself feel, and all the reasons that feeling was either foolish or dangerous or both. He understood it. And he refused to accept it. He called Sung. Find her. Before we continue, please turn on the subscribe button right now, like, and tell us where you are watching from. She was at the Hansung Tower site. It was 6 in the morning and the site was empty of workers and she was standing in the skeleton of the 3rd floor looking out at the city through the open framework, the wind moving through her hair, her arms wrapped around herself, not cold, he thought. Holding herself together. He came up the construction stairs alone. No guards, no Sung, no performance. Just him. She heard his footsteps and turned, and whatever she had been preparing to say when she saw him, the distance, the reason, the collected exit, it didn't arrive. He was looking at her with an expression that made preparation irrelevant. You left, he said. I needed to think. About what? About the fact that you are a man who has people hitting him in the middle of the night, and I am a woman from Lagos who has a presentation on Monday and a life that exists outside of Seoul, and last night was, she stopped. Pressed her fingers to her mouth. He crossed the floor to her. Stopped close enough that she had to tip her chin to look at him. Last night, he said quietly, was the first time I have slept since I met you. She stared at him. I don't know how to be small, Faith. I don't know how to want things moderately. I have spent 15 years making sure nothing got close enough to require me to feel it and you walked across a room and kissed me and everything I built stopped working. He wasn't touching her. His hands were at his sides, and the effort that required was visible in the line of his arms. I am not asking you to stay in Seoul. I am not asking you to become part of a life you didn't choose. I am asking you to let me figure out how to deserve you. Whatever that takes. She was quiet for a long time. The city hummed below them. A crane somewhere in the distance turned in the early light. You sent me 30 orchids, she said finally. I told you I'd remember the correct number. You had me investigated. I was trying to understand what you'd done to me. Did you? A pause. No. I gave up trying to understand it and chose to accept it instead. She looked at him for a long time, the bruise on his cheekbone, the openness in his face, the man underneath the armor that she had been watching assemble and disassemble over 2 weeks in the particular way that proximity made possible. She reached up and touched the bruise gently. The correct number of orchids, she said, is 12. He caught her hand. Held it against his face. 12, he said. I'll remember. She didn't go back to Lagos at the end of her contract. She took a second contract. The Hansung Tower project had a phase 2, and if she had perhaps accepted it more promptly than strictly professional eagerness required, that was between her and the decision. She moved out of the hotel. She did not move into the compound, which she told him very firmly, and he accepted with a restraint that she recognized cost him something. She found an apartment in Mapojiu with a rooftop. She had learned to value rooftops, and it had, coincidentally, a view of the compound from its northern edge. She told herself that was a coincidence. 3 months in, something shifted in the Kwon syndicate. It was not a sudden change. Tae-yang had been moving pieces for longer than Faith had known him, she would learn later, a slow methodical disentanglement from the operations that had no clean version, a redistribution of power, a series of arrangements with the men who ran the syndicate's legitimate ventures that moved gradually, carefully, toward a shape that could exist in daylight. He was not done. He told her that honestly. But he had started. She saw what it cost him, not the danger, which he navigated with the same merciless efficiency he brought to everything, but the identity. 15 years of being the most feared man in a room, and now he was learning how to be something else. Present, available, hers in the specific way that required him to arrive without a shield. He was not perfect at it. He was jealous in the way she had suspected he would be, quietly, intensely, barely contained. When a colleague from her project team began appearing in conversation too often, too warmly, Tae-yang said nothing, but he arrived at her office at lunchtime 3 days in a row with takeout and the expression of a man doing nothing wrong at all. When someone at a gallery opening touched the small of her back, the look on Tae-yang's face made that man reconsider his life choices without a word being exchanged. Faith found it entirely unreasonable and quietly loved every second of it. He showed up. That was the thing she kept returning to. In a life that had taught her that people left, not dramatically, but gradually, in the erosion of consistency, he showed up. Not when it was convenient. He showed up when it was inconvenient, when it was vulnerable, when she was sick with a Seoul winter cold and refusing to be fussed over, and he appeared at her door with soup and the air of a man prepared to be refused entry and planning to stand there regardless. She let him in. She always let him in. The second threat came 6 months later. The Yoon faction had not forgotten. What they could not achieve through the compound, they attempted through her, not an abduction this time, but something more insidious, a campaign of pressure through her professional life. A call to the Hansung Tower client. Fabricated professional misconduct allegations, circulated with enough precision to gain traction. A false story placed in a business publication about financial irregularities tied to her Lagos consultancy. Faith found out on a Thursday morning and called Tae-yang before she called her lawyer, which told her something she hadn't quite admitted to herself yet. He arrived in 12 minutes. She had been counting. He sat across from her at the kitchen table and listened to everything without interrupting, which was the correct instinct and the harder one for him, she could tell. His jaw was very tight by the end. "This is my fault," he said. "It's the Yoon faction's fault. They are using you to reach me. The origin is my world." "The origin is their choice to do it," she said. "Don't take credit for other people's decisions." He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted toward the undefended place, the place she had learned was him, the actual him, underneath the architecture. "I will handle this," he said. "Every publication will retract. The client will receive the correct information. The allegations will be traced to their source and documented for legal purposes. By Monday, this will be gone. Tae-yang. This is the one thing I will not ask your opinion on." He reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was careful, he was always careful with her, even when everything else about him was not careful at all. "The rest of our life, I will consult you on everything. This one thing, people using you to punish me, I handle. Non-negotiable. Our life." He had said it without ceremony, without performance, like it was simply a factual description of the category of the thing they were building. Faith looked at their hands on her kitchen table. "By Monday," she said. "Friday," he said. "I was being conservative." It was gone by Thursday. The proposal was not dramatic. That surprised her, given the scale of everything else about him. They were on the rooftop, her rooftop in Mapojiu, the one that had his compound on its northern horizon, on a Sunday evening in late autumn, 9 months after the night in the Noir Club. She had made jollof rice, which he had eaten 3 servings of with the focus of a man who intended to learn how to make it himself. They were sitting side by side against the railing with a blanket across both of them, looking at the city. He said, without preamble, "I want to marry you." Faith turned to look at him. He was looking at the city, and his jaw was set, and she recognized the specific quality of his stillness. It was the thing he did when the alternative was betraying how much something mattered. "I am aware," he said, still looking forward, "that I am a man with a complicated history and a transition that is not yet complete and a jealousy problem I am working on. I am aware that what I am asking is significant. I am not asking because it is simple. I am asking because you are the only person I have ever come home to." He looked at her then. "You are the only person I have ever come home for." She held his gaze for a long moment. "Your jealousy problem," she said. "I am working on it. The orchid number is 12. For future reference. Not 30, not 50, 12. I know." He reached into the pocket of his jacket and produced a ring. Not a spectacle, not the kind of ring that announced itself before you could look at it. A single stone, clean and perfect, the kind of ring someone chose when they knew exactly who they were choosing it for. "I had it made 4 months ago," he said quietly. "I've been waiting for the right moment, but I don't think there is a right moment. I think there is only the decision." She looked at the ring. She looked at his face. "You terrify me," she said. "I know. You terrify me too. I think that's what this is." She held out her left hand. They married in the spring, a small ceremony by Tae-yang's standards, which meant 60 people, a venue in Jongno-ji with a view of the city, and the entire guest list understanding without being told that photographs were at the couple's discretion. Faith wore something her mother had embroidered in Lagos and sent wrapped in tissue paper with a letter that made her cry on the morning of her wedding in the very best way. Tae-yang wore black and stood at the end of the aisle with the expression of a man holding himself very carefully together. When she walked toward him, he stopped holding himself together entirely. Sung, standing behind him, pretended he was not witnessing this. They said their vows in the private, direct, stripped-down language of two people who had already said the harder things in a safe room and a construction site at dawn and a kitchen table with a threat between them, and no performance was necessary between them anymore. The news of the pregnancy arrived 11 months into the marriage, on an ordinary morning, Faith standing in the bathroom, Tae-yang still in bed reading, and her appearing in the doorway with an expression that made him put the book down immediately. She showed him the test without speaking. He was off the bed before she could prepare for it, across the room, his arms around her face against his neck, and the sound he made was the quietest, most undone thing she had ever heard from him, the sound of a man who had been afraid for so long that relief was indistinguishable from grief. "Tae-yang," she said against his shoulder. "I know," he said. His arms were very tight. "I know." Later, she would think about the dare. The ridiculous, wine-fueled, 50,000 won dare that had sent her across a room in a Seoul underground club toward the most feared man in Asia, and the 30 seconds that had rearranged both of their lives from the inside out. She thought about the way his body had told the truth before his mind could stop it. The way a man built of control had been undone by a stranger's mouth. The way he had not punished her for it but instead, slowly, carefully, persistently, had come toward her like someone making peace with the best thing that had ever happened to him. She thought about how the dare had never really been about the dare. It had been about being brave enough for the things that actually mattered. In the end, she had been. So had he. Besties, this is Stories Behind the Billions. Like, share, subscribe.